Welcome to the Everyday Leader Podcast. Leadership is a choice. Join me, Matt, and my co-hosts Drew and Tate each episode as we break down how to lead powerfully in your family, team, and organization.
Hey guys, welcome to the Everyday Leader Podcast. Here with Matt and Drew today. We're going to have a quick jam on being a leader within your home. And with that, let's start with Matt. Like, what comes to mind when you hear that?
Yeah, it's funny. I think back to when I was younger, even like early married and started having kids. And I think that was always kind of a given, right? It's like, well, you're going to be a leader of your family. And I don't think that I really appreciated all that entailed, and actually what a great opportunity that would be and what a fulfilling thing that would be. So I really believe that within a family, like within a home, is the most confronting opportunity to learn leadership. And I joke sometimes that our kids basically like carry around a mirror, whether that's through their behavior and the way they talk and act, right? That's a mirror of what they've learned from me, or just because they have no context for maybe like how to challenge, they're also really willing to just say things and bring them to your attention in a really almost nonchalant way. And so that's a beautiful thing if we're willing to be aware of it and let it help us see things that maybe we can't see, or see areas that we can shift the way we're showing up. So I absolutely love that. And even just having that as a belief that the home and the family is an amazing place to learn leadership, that shifts the way I show up. That shifts the way I look at things that come up. So that's my initial thought and my take on it.
Yeah. Drew, what do you got just on initial thoughts on what this means?
The word Matt used, I would highly agree with, is confronting. So it's like, if in my opinion, there's no place that matters more to be a leader than in your home and to your family and with your family members. And maybe this is just my experience. It feels like it's the hardest place to do it. Like, I feel like I can often show up as a leader in a lot of places, and it's, I think the challenge is making sure my family doesn't get what's left at the end of the day. Like, that I don't show up as a leader in other areas of my life, and then when I get home, it's like I'm exhausted or I'm done, and not be who they need me to be, who they want me to be. And and so I think it's just kind of funny, because I feel like family gets the realest version of you, typically. And so to really be a leader in your home, I think if you can master that, it's like, I think almost every other area, not that it's going to be easy necessarily. And at the same time, if you can master being a leader in your home, then like anywhere else you show up, I think it's just going to be magnified.
Yeah, listening to both you guys, and just the comment coming up is, being confronting and challenging as far as being a leader within your home. And I absolutely agree with it. It makes me wonder, with that, if it's kind of an internal self thing that we all have, because I struggle with it too, of knowing that these people are the ones that may have the realest view of that we struggle to show up as a leader every day, and maybe leading to a little bit of lack of confidence in it. And I don't know, it's just kind of a thought that comes to my mind.
Yeah, I think that one of the other things that stands out to me when I think about my relationship with my kids specifically, because and maybe this is the same for you guys. I feel like as I increased my awareness and got committed to being a leader in my home, I don't want to say it was easier. It was faster and probably maybe actually, yeah, a little bit easier to kind of clean up the way I was showing up with my wife, Kelsey, than it was with my kids. And again, like that's fascinating. Like I've spent a lot of time reflecting on why is that and what is it about that. And but there's been a couple things that I've realized over the years that were the most like areas that I really wanted to shift. So the first one is I read a story that my great grandma wrote a few years ago, and she in the story she talked about how they were committed to talking to their children with respect. And again, on the surface, it's like, well, yeah, we've been talking about respecting people since we were in kindergarten, but it had me reflect that specific time, like, do I talk to my children with respect? And what is that like? What would that look like, or what would that not look like, right? And I actually did have a realization. I was like, wow. Again, and I'm not necessarily talking about like berating people, you know, my kids or anything. And I did have to recognize and chose to recognize, yeah, I wouldn't really talk to anyone else like this. Like just for what it is. Like if I just thought on a daily basis, like sometimes the way I react, the way I respond, or my tone, I had to admit, like, yeah, I don't talk to anyone else this way. And that was a little bit confronting. Like, wow, why is that? And, you know, fast forward a couple of years, I think that's still the case. I think that, and I can recognize I've made a lot of progress. I can recognize that my awareness around it is a lot higher. And so that, again, that just sent me kind of down this path of analyzing and looking at my language, the way I speak to my children with respect or not. So, yeah, what for you guys, like, what comes up when you hear that? I saw you guys both nodding about that concept of like, do we really talk to our children, you know, with respect and treat them with respect the way that we would other people?
I think it's easy, you know, I know for me, you know, after a long day of work or just a long day in general or being stressed or, you know, you come home and it's super easy to want to just kind of check out mentally. And you have to realize that both your kids and your spouse, you know, they're kind of counting on you, or they hadn't seen you all day. There's conversations that need to have, you know, they may want to play with you, that just simply want attention. And sometimes it's work to stay in it. You know, you kind of want to come home and just turn off, and you know, arguably that's one of the worst things you could do. You know, granted, a day here and there is probably not terrible, but when that's your norm every day, you know, I think it leads to those other things like you're talking about when you're checked out, and then all of a sudden, you know, your son's coming over trying to get your attention and maybe being a little obnoxious because you're not paying attention about it, and you know, you're more up to kind of react. And you know, I think we can all agree that's certainly not what we want. At least I know that for me, that's not how I want to show up for my kids. And, you know, it's really not fair to them. And so, yeah, I absolutely feel it.
Yeah, I'll just share an experience that happened recently. Liam's my oldest boy. He is 8 years old. And one thing we've been working with him on for a while is sometimes he lets his emotions get the best of him. So something will happen and he'll just have an emotional outburst reaction, which can be embarrassing as a parent, especially if it's in public or your son's like in tears and you're like, oh, this is a reflection on me, right? And yeah, something, I don't even remember what it was. Something happened a couple weeks ago and he emotionally reacted and I in turn emotionally reacted back to him. And then afterwards we had a discussion that, hey, your reaction wasn't okay and neither was mine. And that was like a little bit humbling for me. And we just made some agreements that, hey, that one, this isn't okay for either of us to act this way. When Matt talks about your kids being a mirror, it's like, man, here I am telling my child not to have an emotional outburst, and I just lost it a little bit on him immediately after and did the exact same thing. So yeah, I think there's just so much opportunity to look inward inside your family and really evaluate, hey, is who I want to be. Am I living it here in my home first?
You know, Matt, I think, touched on one of the major key aspects for me in this whole conversation. And that's, you know, taking the time to step back and be aware and self-reflect on how we're showing up, you know, how we're interacting, you know, what version of us is our family getting. And, you know, along with that, I think it's important to realize that it could be really beneficial to have some intentions around that. And with that, I talk a lot about intent. It's for me, it's a major thing, whether it's in business or showing up for your family. And it's simply asking yourself the question of, is this who I want to be? Is this how I want to be? Is this how I want to show up? And I think once you can really nail those down and identify those, you can really start holding yourself accountable to, am I doing that? And when you maybe come short of, you know, being that, like, now you have kind of, I don't know, the goalpost or whatever to bring yourself back to. And so for me, I that's huge. And I'd encourage everyone to ask himself that question of, who do I want to be? You know, how do I want to show up, and come in it with true intention.
Yeah, that's so good. And one of the things that I know is real for a lot of fathers and for myself at times is like, when I ask myself that question and I see the answer is like, well, not the way I just showed up right now, or not the way I've been showing up, that can kind of spiral us down into kind of like a place of shame and maybe guilt sometimes. And what I found is that my willingness to forgive myself in those moments is actually the thing that helps me climb out of it the fastest. Because as long as I stay thinking about and talking about like how I didn't show up and how I don't want to be, and what's not working, and how that's not okay, then I stay in that. And so this is like a really simple concept, and I think a lot of us overlook it. It's like, are we really willing to, when something happens, forgive ourselves to the point where we can like regain the way of being that we want, and then go and clean up whatever mess we just made, you know, as a result of that. So, and along with that, right, is like our willingness to forgive ourselves. For me, I've seen that also gets me to a place where I can go ask for forgiveness of my kids. And I fall back on this, that our kids having a model of someone admitting and acknowledging a mistake or something that didn't work very good, and then asking for forgiveness, is about as powerful of a model as they could ever have. And again, I get that, like, if we get into it, you know, could you make terrible decisions all the time and show up in a terrible way and just apologize a million times? Yes. What I'm talking about is like a more legitimate, like, showing your kids like, hey, I'm not perfect. I'm also working on these things with you, and I'm legitimately sorry. You know, do you forgive me? To me, that's just such a powerful thing to have as an anchor and to model for our kids.
Yeah. And I think,
you know,
go ahead,
Drew.
Well, I think the next step from there, Matt, is then like, do we view ourselves or create an identity of like who we are as a father, or who we are as a husband or a mother or a spouse? And are we, you know, looking to live into that every day? Because I think it's just as important, right, to view yourself, hey, I am a good father. I'm a good husband. I'm a good spouse. And if you tell yourself that and and believe that about yourself, like it makes it easier to live that way and show up that way for your kids every day and for your spouse.
Well, and I love that you brought up, kind of the other side of that, because I think that shame loop is something that a lot of people struggle with, um, especially in today's society. Uh, Everybody's watching everybody with social media and everything else, and this kind of gets outside of the parenting a little bit, but it's the same kind of thing, and how hard we are on ourselves and the expectations we have on ourselves, which I'm not saying expectations are all bad, maybe it's the wrong term, but it's it's good to recognize, to your point, that we can forgive ourselves and we are going to come up short at times, and that's okay. We are all human, and we're all trying to do the best we can every day, and I think acknowledging that and trying to get out of the perfectionism mindset, I think is good. I think for me, it's more of a continuous growth mindset, and I want to learn. I want to continue to develop, be better, and for myself as well as everyone I love around me.
Yeah. To kind of tie some of these things together, what comes to my mind is like the 3 A's that I recommend every leader use when they're doing like a one-on-one check-in, or just even like as a general kind of like pattern to follow as a leader. And it applies here in our home too. And that is like acknowledge, ask, and agreement. And so with what we're talking about, right, it's like acknowledgement is huge, because another word for it would be awareness, right? Like if we can't see something that's off or that's not working, then our attention will not go to it to address it or clean it up. So acknowledging is massive, because again, it shows our kids like, hey, we're not perfect. We are going to, make mistakes or make choices that don't work very good. And along with that, I like to include, and we could spend more time talking about this for sure, acknowledging our children when they do what works, right? Like that's an acknowledgement. Hey, I want to acknowledge you for keeping your agreement. Hey, I want to acknowledge you for creating peace in our home today. So that's just huge. And then ask is like ask forgiveness. Ask how you can support. Ask what they're excited about. Jim Collins talks about how great leaders lead with questions, not answers. When our kids come to us, like, are we willing to ask, meaningful questions, and then listen? And then Drew mentioned agreements earlier. Agreements are huge. Agreements have completely changed our home, because loose expectations. In fact, someone told me the other day that unexpressed expectations are premeditated resentment, and it's so true, right?
I love that. I mean,
we have
these
expectations in our head, and sometimes we verbalize them, sometimes we don't. Like we just expect people to read our mind. Sometimes we verbalize them. Sometimes we verbalize them, and people even say yes to them, and we think that we're, that we have this clear agreement. But our kids are, my kids are 5 and 8 and 3. So who's the crazy one for reacting poorly when a 5-year-old doesn't remember the thing we talked about yesterday, right? Not the 5-year-old, right?
Right.
And so leaders create agreements and then get used to talking about them forever. Because, and if anyone thinks that like, well, when my kids get older or my kids get out of the house, then this isn't a thing. This is the same in business and any organization. Our willingness to continue to revisit the things that work, the things that we want, the things that we've agreed on, creates consistency and clarity and gets us, the results we want. So.
Matt, for our listeners, will you say those 3 A's one more time?
Yeah. So acknowledge, and that's acknowledge maybe the things that we are responsible for, and also acknowledging people powerfully, like for their contribution. Ask questions, lead with questions, ask for forgiveness, ask how you can support, ask what people are excited about, and then agreement. And I'm sure we could do a whole episode, and probably will, just on how to create agreements, and taking that time to really like create them, but then also be willing to revisit them. I've just found those three words have been a real guide for me.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I love that. It's amazing.
Well, maybe just one other thought before we wrap up today. How can someone identify if they're winning as a leader in their home? I think it's easy to like point out, here's where I got to do better. Here's where I got to improve. Like, what would you guys say to that? How would you demonstrate or show to someone who's, maybe doesn't feel like they are, that, hey, maybe there's more wins they're having as a parent or as a spouse than maybe they realize or think they have?
One of the things I always love is, and it's always funny because we're so hard on our kids, and we expect crazy things sometimes, like Matt said. And I've always loved when my kids go over to somebody else's house and, you're picking them up and somebody makes the comment about how good your kids were and how, polite they were and respectful. And, you always almost have to laugh because like, well, where'd that kid come from? But it's reassuring that, man, maybe the things we're teaching are sinking in. And, that's just one example of, a win that I think of that always hits. But outside of that, for me personally, there's a lot of wins, and it's taking the time to stop and recognize and feel them, and have the conversations. Ask the things like Matt said. It's I'm very guilty of, if somebody doesn't speak up, just assuming like, okay, they're good, they're on board, or they're in alignment with me. And something I need to do better about is taking the time to stop and have that genuine conversation, saying, hey, where are you really at? And so I think in those moments, the fact that you can have those conversations is a win in itself. And there's just so many good things. Like,
Yeah, Drew, I'm not sure if you were digging for an answer here, but this is where my mind goes. That if we're willing to have, at a minimum, like some values defined for our family, and some kind of identity established, then to me that's really what anchors. And again, we could spend hours just talking about that. But having an identity and some core values established really creates the anchor for leadership in the home, because it actually what provides the avenue for creating agreements and reacting in a way that works. Because when there's none of that is clear, then expectations reign and chaos ensues. And when we have an identity and we have values and we are anchored in them, then our agreement and what works and what doesn't work is all anchored in who we've said we are. And I mean, our kids are young and they listen, even though I don't think they are most of the time. It's oftentimes, like Tate said, you find out that they're listening in some circumstance or situation when you're not trying to ask them to recite or to, tell you what they've learned or whatever. And so as far as how we know we're winning, for me, it's like, are we being intentional? That is the identity of our family. And, we've created a lot of things around that. And then for this year, our word of the year was peace. And that also helped us know if we were winning. Because it's like, are we making decisions based on what creates peace in our home, in our family? And then even on a daily basis, like, hey, did we experience peace today? Like, and starting with me, did I contribute to peace today, or did I contribute to the lack of it? And And so, and you can look back and say, wow, yeah, we're winning. We did. Today was, had moments, and like we experienced peace in our home today, and the way we acted, the way we treated each other, created peace in our home.
So how's
I
Drew
love
winning?
that, guys. Well, I'd probably echo some of what you guys said. I think one, it's looking for it. Like, am I looking for how we're winning or what we are doing right, so I can do more of that? And yeah, something we've really wanted to instill in our kids is self-confidence. I can say I didn't have a lot of self-confidence growing up, and it's not because my parents like treated me like a dog, a kicked dog or something. It was just I just didn't have it. And I think there's sometimes this fear of like, hey, if you teach your kids to be confident, are they going to be like cocky? And I'd rather run that risk than the risk of my kids not believing in themselves and not having self-worth. But yeah, really interesting. Just so my kids had a community play, Pinocchio. And I was just blown away. Once again, my son, Liam, I can't get him to sing in the car with me. And he was also funny. He came out of the machine as a perfect child and then sung a solo. And I was just like shocked. Like here's an example of his confidence being demonstrated in himself. Kind of like you said, Matt, I can't even get him to recite something back to me I just had a conversation with him about. And yet sometimes it's like letting them go to a friend's house or letting them go out in the world and just succeed or fail. So yeah, I think that's how I see it. I think it's hardest to see the wins in the home. I think giving them a chance to go out and win or fail sometimes is where you often start seeing your kids win a lot.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, but I think, for me, taking the time to reflect. I mean, we get so busy, and it's so easy to identify the things that we don't feel are going right. And so taking the time to see those wins, I think, is really crucial and a really positive thing for the whole family.
Yeah, totally.
Well, this has been so good. For the listener, anything that has come to your mind as you've listened today, I invite you to take action on it. So if this has elevated your awareness and you can acknowledge some things, go acknowledge them to whoever is coming to your mind, whether that's your spouse, your kids. If you recognize, wow, I could really shift in some areas and haven't shown up in the way I want, go acknowledge it. And again, that's like, to me, that's like awareness in action. It's one thing to be aware of something. It's another thing to take an action because of your awareness. And so have your awareness increase and don't let it stop there. Take action. And to me, an acknowledgement is part of that, is a start to that. And by sharing in that acknowledgement with others, you're also inviting them to help hold you accountable. And that's a beautiful thing. It's also a very confronting thing. So, but you got this. It's also, our kids are so resilient and so forgiving and so quick to see what's good. So again, if you're willing to recognize things and then forgive yourself, your kids have already forgiven you. Right, for the most part, especially if they're younger. Like, it just doesn't occur to them to hold on to things. And so if you can forgive yourself, you're good to go with them because they've already let it go. They don't even probably remember it.
Yeah.
So good. Well, thank you guys. With that, we'll wrap up today. And I always enjoy these conversations and learn so much from each one of you every time we talk, and just the different insights. And it's amazing how much the three of us can talk and still find nuggets of inspiration and thought-provoking things. And so for me, thank you. And let's do it again.
Yeah, of course. Okay.
Awesome.
Today's the day.
Today's the day.
Thanks for joining us on the Everyday Leader podcast. If you're ready to take your leadership journey even further, subscribe to our weekly newsletter for more insights and practical tips. And don't forget to connect with us on Instagram to stay a part of our growing community. Just follow the links in the show notes. If this episode impacted you, please help us spread the word and share the link with a friend from wherever you're listening.